floor.
So we're gonna make the chow masala now.
Yes, we're on the other side.
Here we go. I'm gonna see how easy this is. So we're gonna start with chopping some onions.
What is the proper term to describe the situation in a lot of Brooklyn communities where they just don't have access?
Start with chopping some onions.
What is the
It depends who you talk to. I mean, I think, from an academic perspective, I think it's still
where they just don't have access.
Start with chopping some onions. And it depends who you talk to. I mean, I think, I think it comes down to an academic necessarily have access.
Where they just don't have access.
Start with chopping some onions. Whether that's in a community like ours, it would be walking distance. In a more rural community, it might be driving distance.
Yeah.
It depends on the community, but it's sort of about how easily can you access in
rural
food
community,
and
it might be driving distance.
Yeah.
It depends on the thing about this project is, like, I don't think anyone should have to eat on $4 a day. I think that sucks. To be honest.
Yeah.
Like, if it were up to me, it would be a totally different number. But it is a reality for so many people. And so given that reality, what can we do to sort of to be empowered in that situation? I think it's like learn how to cook and become comfortable and become flexible, have a few recipes that you really know well, that you can get most of the ingredients for, and you're sort of better set up.
So for people who are living life, going to the bodega where they get the majority of their food, what is a basic thing? Because a lot of people have never even heard of like a chana masala kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
You put chickpeas.
Well, so it's like curried
onions.
chickpeas, or I think lentils and beans and those kinds of things are a really, really great place to start and sort of become comfortable, because they're a great source of protein.
Right.
They're a really nice sort of center of a meal. A lot of the recipes in Good and Cheap are sort of by necessity and because I think it's fun and it creates variety. They're vegetarian because meat is fairly expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not that you have to live completely without meat or anything, but when it's the absolute center of every meal, it's going to be more expensive. So we have onion and garlic here.
Right.
And then, so these aren't usually things you can get at the bodega, spices. But if you have a regular grocery store anywhere near you, or any sort of like ethnic market, usually there's some good spice deals. And again, if you're missing one of these, it's okay. So this is about, I think that's like
a pound of
tablespoon.
butter.
It's not a pound of butter. It's like a tablespoon, maybe a little bit more, and let that melt. And then, yes, we're going to add the cumin seeds.
Could I use that big tub of margarine that my grandma used to make?
You definitely
so it's
can.
Not like a fancy thing to...
You for sure can. So now we're going to, I have the exact measurements in the recipe, but I usually just kind of go like that. So about like that. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, there. Can you smell it? The cumin. Boom. And so now we're going to add all this onion. And I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit now.
Yeah. Now I can really smell it. The cumin, the onion, and the butter.
If we look at that bodega, all of the cheapest stuff was the stuff that had the least done to it. The rice. It's uncooked. The dried beans. Like the more sort of whole and basic the food, the less expensive it was for the most part.
Right.
Things that have something down to it, even the canned tomatoes, are a little more expensive because they have that roasted garlic in them already. These are sort of a fancier kind, and so anything like that is going to cost more. And so if you can sort of get comfortable with things at their most basic level and know how to bring them together in really simple ways, you can get by, and you can actually have food that you really enjoy. There's our timer. I think that's the rice saying might be close to ready.
Wow.
It's looking fluffy.
Yeah, rice.
All right. And how much of that garlic do you want to add? All of it? Okay, do it.
All
do it.
of the garlic. Bam! Is that show still on the air? Is Emerald alive?
So now we're going to add a little bit of, I like to use this. This isn't essential, but I really love smoked paprika. It just adds a little bit, obviously, beautiful color and a sort of smoky note. I love to just keep it because I do a lot of vegetarian cooking. It adds a smoky element that you can't get that easily without meat and turmeric. And so we're going to add quite a lot of this. The coriander, I think like a full tablespoon, maybe a little bit less. But yeah, it's really a spice-heavy dish. But it's because we're using such simple ingredients other than that, so you want that flavor and the beautiful turmeric. Gorgeous color. Look at that. We've got our red, brown, and yellow. So just dump that in.
Oddly enough, it smells like there's bacon cooking. Do you get that impression?
It's because of the paprika.
Chickpeas.
Chickpeas.
So these are gonna lay in wait.
Lay in wait, exactly.
Ooh, the spice hit me at the end.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
Yeah, not in a bad way. It got all smoky and...
I would add maybe just like a cup or so of water usually, but since we got it, coconut milk. Yeah. All right. Great. And so now we'll just kind of let that simmer until it thickens up a bit and all the flavors kind of meld together, and we will be done. This is looking incredible. Can you see how the oil from the coconut is starting to separate a little bit? Delicious.
This is the fruits of our labor.
Yeah.
A steaming pile.
And we got the addition of the egg from your pocket.
I never go anywhere without a boiled egg. Everyone who knows me.
I really like.
So I never go anywhere without a
Both
boiled egg.
added something to this dish.
So that is a thing. So I'm looking at this. There's the two of us. We also have 2 crew members here who are enjoying some Chinese.
And we still have leftovers.
And there's
for
still
at least
a
2 more.
honking pot. So our total when we left Nelson's today was about $14 that we paid.
Pretty good.
And this is gonna feed 4 people at least twice.
Yeah,
And we've still got onions and garlic to boot.
like $1.75 a person. And yeah, and we still have onions and garlic left over. I really like the coconut. That was a great addition.
That was our splurge. And we
Garlic
were still under 15.
extravaganza plus coconut.
It's really good.
I love it.
We are at 462 Halsey Community Farm on a lovely early spring day.
Yes.
How does this intersect with your professional life, Ray?
What I've come to realize is that the need for food access in the community was a great one, and to have varied sources of food in the community was definitely needed. And so even though there's a bodega there are grocery stores all around, there's not a lot of available fresh produce in the area. If people need to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, then we need to look at what people have historically called alternative food economies in order to do that. A community garden, farm stands, farmers markets. A year-round farmers market would be so great in this community. East New York, for example, has over 65 community gardens.
Yeah.
People thought, well, the government's not looking out for us. Our leaders aren't really looking out for us.
Right.
We have to do for self.
So they took something that was at best benign neglect
Exactly.
and turned it into a community resource
Exactly.
like where we're standing right now.
What I do in my position is look at the way that the communities have resisted against that and created something new.
I love that historical perspective because some people might take a lesson-formed view and say, oh, this is something that they made up or this is created, or even look at it as a sign of gentrification through some lenses.
Right.
But this is historically what people have done if you
Absolutely.
take the long view. This
Absolutely.
is not something new.
We found an article in 1908 in the Brooklyn Eagle that talked about a cooperative grocery organized by the Negroes, it said. And, that was an example of how Black people were organizing for better food in the community and historically have been doing that. And so we organize from that perspective, that cooperatives are not an exercise of a gentrified community where gentrifiers want to respond to the lack of food in the community, that Black communities have been thinking about different ways to organize to get better food in the community, and this is just another one of them.
So I'm from Fort Myers, Florida. I was fully out since I was 15. So I was like, girl, Sister Honey Mary, like nothing's gonna hold me back. I basically knew when I became an adult at 18 that I would have to provide for myself. And I felt like the EBT program was a way for me to eat. I was renting a room with a trans couple, and they kind of took me in, let me stay there and pay rent. And that's sort of how I first got EBT, and I got acclimated to the system. They had a 3-month-old daughter, and they were just struggling to make ends meet, and 8 months had gone by, and I was sustaining myself, but I was slowly running out of options as far as career. How am I gonna live? You know, my mother had passed away 4 months earlier, and it was just a lot. So for me, I knew that the opportunity wasn't really where I was. It was in a bigger city. And you know how they say, follow the money? So I did. Cross country. I love New York. Always fell in love with the idea of New York, the fact that you could be a rebel. They have such a mix of people here. For the most part, I was on the Upper West Side. There's a shelter there that I stayed at until I got my apartment. But I was pounding the pavement. I was doing the best I could. EBT is kind of one of the few bright points of being homeless, because at the end of the day, you know that you have food. You know that you have something to barter. A lot of people barter with food stamps, and it sort of got me out of a few rough patches because I just didn't have enough on me when I first started, and I had suitcases, and you have to pay for train metro. You have to make every appointment. You have to run around the city and exhaust yourself, and then try to eat in the meantime. EBT, it's sort of like a debit card that only certain places accept, like delis, grocery stores, and as of recently, farmers markets. To receive EBT benefits, you have to qualify for SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. In New York City, the max amount one person can receive is $192 a month. The income caps for SNAP eligibility in New York are strict. For a single person to qualify, they need to make under $16K a year. This can create challenges for people when they're choosing their work, not wanting to make too much and lose their eligibility. When I was homeless, I would have to get jobs that were off the books so I could keep my benefits. It became more and more difficult to make ends meet. I will say that maybe 6 out of 10 people that I knew that were on EBT that were trans women were also doing sex work. Sometimes my roommate in the Bronx needed $20, $30, or she was short, and she had EBT too, but we would spot each other when we needed to. So that's kind of how we got by for a lot of it. Because we were doing sex work, so it's if a date doesn't come, or if a date backs out, you still have to eat. You still have to do what you gotta do. When I was living in the Bronx, I met this beautiful girl who was a friend of a friend. I'd never heard of her before, or at least as far as I knew. I was like, Andrea, who is that? I could pretty much already tell that we were gonna probably like each other. We started living together about a year ago. Andrea and me were just trying to figure it out. Figure it all out. Figure out living together, figure out holding down jobs. I was applying for SSI, so things were tough. I basically relied on EBT throughout all last winter because it was so hard to try and manage a monthly food budget when everything is so expensive and only one of you works. It's even harder, I think, managing as a couple. So I took what I didn't use, and I would definitely cook meals for us. Because either way, when it's your family, you understand you can't really afford to go without. I haven't lived here that long, but I do love Brooklyn in the sense that there's way closer options. It wasn't all big chain supermarkets. You know, you have co-ops, you have obviously like Food Bazaar. Having lived it as a kid, I sort of learned how to like make things stretch. Obviously pasta is one thing, a lot of pasta, a lot of rice and beans. What else? Breakfast burritos. Huge fan of breakfast burritos. I would definitely say stick to the basics as much as possible. I think you'll sustain yourself more if you have a lot of smaller meals rather than like, I'm gonna sit down at a table and have lunch, because who has time for that? Usually most people are working, you know. This is a city where anything can happen, and I shudder at the thought to think of like anything that could happen or a complication, and then we're surviving on EBT for a while again, you know? And we've kind of gotten to the point where we have been able to take care of ourselves and we have a system down. But it is so easy to fall off that horse, and it's easy to lose it.
Instinctually, I'm like trying to catch the crumbs, and then it sort of became like hero worship in a way, where I felt very Grecian because I'm like beholding the bowl to the queen.
Thank you. I'm gonna.
You know, these aren't half done.
No, they're really good. You're the best.
How could a supermarket or more supermarkets not be the answer if there's food apartheid? It seems like a supermarket is the answer.
It would seem as if it is, but I would say close to 80% of the food in a supermarket are processed. The outer aisles of a supermarket, that's where all the fresh fruits and vegetables and the dairy is. So you're not incentivized to buy those things. Yeah. So if we're talking about something that's responding to public health issues such as obesity, diabetes, you know, any diet-related illnesses, supermarkets tend not to be the answers because they aren't incentivized to sell you those produce. In fact, fresh fruits and vegetables are called specialty items. They're not incentivized even by the government. They're not subsidized by the government. And so the things that are subsidized by the government are corn and soy and wheat, you know, things that make it into the processed food. So from the very top to the very small, our food system is broken.
Chicken is so good over here. I mean, you make you want to smack your mama. It's good. I'm telling you, the chicken is good. I'm not joking. You know, I've been coming here since I was a kid here. You know, I live around here. You know, and this is the best one where they got the best chicken. I don't know how they got it so good like that, but it's their special ingredient. It's the best chicken. You gotta try it. You gonna like it.
I am a regular at Yonkers. The food is good. They're known for their chicken, and it's right around the corner from where I live. They know my order because at least once a week, I've come in and ordered the same thing, so they know automatically when I come in.
I mean, it stand out for me because it's like right next to the train station, so it's like right here, quick stop before work, get a little something to drink or something.
As soon as we get out, come straight over here, grab something, head over to work, on the way to the train, last minute, pull up right here, grab what you need. They got some good chicken, Most of the time, I look if it's clean, the hospitality, you know, not, you know, cutting their eye at us, looking in there like we about to steal something.
Perfect service.
Everything good over here.
My favorite thing for me is the hot wings. So the hot wings or like the sandwiches is really good. And the chicken. When I come in, they just know hot wings and fries. That's all I get. And blue and ranch. The vibe in here, like it's just not like every other bodega. Like it's more like family.
I've been coming here at least 30 years. Ever since they've been here. I've been in the neighborhood 54 years. You know the old man? That's my man. Everybody that have been polite and good to with me, I can only speak for myself. So they're just fine with me. I guess I can say it like this. They fried chicken!
To catch past episodes, visit us on the web at youtube.com/Bric TV. Bye now.
For a blink moment in time, people are aware of what they're feeling every day.
If you're going to restore and sustain a democracy, there must be an informed and engaged citizen.
I spent 2 years in immigration detention. You know how much they spent to feed me for one whole day?
How much?
75 cents.
Immigrants as a whole, migration as a whole, is associated with lower rates of crime. Immigrants make our communities safer.
What causes climate change, the selling and burning of fossil fuels, benefits most the power elite. And so they have a disincentive to address it, and they have an incentive to deny it.
They're not going to funnel more money into our schools. They're not going to do it unless they have to, right? And the way they have to is by our participation, our organization, us taking accountability for our actions.
Dream of the things you'll never know. Oh, dream of the beauty within your soul. George Floyd! When you dream,
You walk into your bodega, put your money down, and pray that someday your number comes up.
He won $343.8 million.
But what if you really do hit it big? Can you handle the truth? 245, I'll take this one, please. Maybe your first call should be to this man.
Okay, listen, this is what you're gonna do.
He's the lottery lawyer.
No, I'm telling you, I've seen this before, just do not tell anybody.
Meanwhile, Bric Davis is telling everybody about the numbers game. Her new book describes the bygone world of the numbers. For decades, it offered folks a shot at leaving poverty behind.
It thrived for 60 years until the legal lottery stepped in.
What was it like hearing your own mother fielding calls as a big-time numbers runner?
That was like a daytime lullaby for me.
This week, we keep going in on a bodega in Brooklyn. This time with $1 and a dream.
That's my money. Shit.
Let me have 369, $1 straight, $1 box for the midday. If you understood what any of that means, there's probably an envelope somewhere in your house with a whole bunch of numbers you dreamed up written all over the back. Or maybe you're the type who plays your mom's birth date on her birthday. If you're even more confused than when I began this whole thing, odds are you're probably not one of the New Yorkers standing in line for their 1 in 7,282,016 chance of winning $1,000 a week for life. Every sunrise is like a new check when you win cash for life. And who could argue with that? Certainly not New York's luckiest lottery retailer, Carlton Cards in Penn Station, where they sell, on average, $246,000 worth of lottery tickets every single week. That haul may be just a tad less here at our bodega, but it doesn't prevent anyone with $1 and a dream from trying their luck. But thinking about that 1 in 7 million chance, is winning the lottery a pipe dream? Some critics go as far to say that it's a tax on the poor that preys on those who can least afford it. Nationwide, people with incomes under $10,000 a year spend about $600 annually on lottery tickets, and that's nearly 6% of their income. One national research study concluded that lotteries set off a vicious cycle that not only exploit low-income individuals' desires to escape poverty, but also directly prevent them from improving upon their financial situations. But it ain't all bad. Since 1967, $64 billion, that's all the profits from the sale of New York State lottery tickets, has gone to K through 12 public education. So whether you're in it to win it, or you don't want to waste your money, have some fun already as we go in on the lottery. All you need is $1 and a dream. But where does that dollar end up? And if you do happen to be the 1 in 302.6 million, how much money do you actually get? Let's start at the beginning. Government-authorized lotteries in America started in the mid-1700s. Columbia University was even largely funded by multiple lotteries. By the 1790s, the average resident of New York and Philly spent the modern equivalent of $1,400 a year on lottery tickets. In the 1830s, things shifted when operators started pocketing the cash, and religious institutions started saying the game was a sin. Lotteries went underground for another century, but stayed popular in urban areas. And in 1963, New Hampshire passed a bill permitting a state lottery dedicated to funding education. And New York followed shortly after. But just exactly how much money goes to education? Well, from 2017 through 2018, the New York State Lottery brought in just shy of $10 billion. And $3.3 billion of that went to funding education. So if all this is going towards education, how much will go in your pocket? Well, let's say you won a $10 million jackpot. Assuming you're like 80% of lottery winners and you took the lump sum instead of annual payments, your jackpot gets cut in half. So now you have $5 million. The federal government takes around 24% of the winnings for taxes, and then state and local taxes come after that. So, of the initial $10 million jackpot, you're now left with around $2.5 million. But what about scratch-offs? Usually lower stakes, but depending on the game, they can offer up to $3 million in prize money, or the classic win for life. Your odds of winning a couple of bucks are around 1 in 3. Scratch-offs are by far the biggest money makers for the New York Lottery, bringing in over $4 billion in the 2017-18 fiscal year. So who's playing? Well, according to a Gallup poll, 50% of Americans. More specifically, in Brooklyn, East New York, East Flatbush, and downtown Brooklyn are the biggest scratch-off buyers. Given that if Brooklyn were to secede from New York City, it would be the country's 4th largest city. That's a lot of people, and a lot of lotto tickets. But is it worth it for our bodega owners?
The lottery pay you 6%.
So
it's
for
a lot of
every
work.
dollar, so if I buy my $2 $144 million ticket, you get 12 cents.
12 cents. The 12 cents they charge me tax.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. $2 goes to them, 12 cents goes to you on this side, and then on this side the tax guy is saying.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, how much of that 12 cents is yours?
I don't have it like that because it's too much work.
Yeah, to even look at it.
Yeah, just run the computer, how much you will sell, like that.
Yeah. So you need to sell a lot more dollar ice cups to make it worth it to come out and work in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a 7. I'm feeling 4. A 7, a 4, and I want to say 6, but it might be 3. A 7, a 4, and a 3.
A 2.
7, 4, 2. I'm the lottery whisperer.
I'm gonna put it this way.
Called donation.
Dollar straight, 50-cent combo.
My number now. So explain to me the whole box versus the straight combination, whatever.
Like, this is straight.
808.
808 is straight.
So if it came out 088.
That's called a box.
So what's the most that you've ever hit playing
Me?
the number?
That I've ever hit?
That you personally walked away with from G Money.
From G Money?
Yeah.
What was it, G? 330 a few times? The 200s? No, the 600s.
Let me get 310.
Yo, nice meeting you guys.
50-50.
That's a good number, 310.
That's my birthday.
I hope 310 don't come out today, maybe tomorrow, because I need that
Come on,
889.
Mr. Miranda.
I need it. That's my dude. Nah, that's my buddy. He's all right. I'm hating because he's a new guy. He's going to win. He's going to win.
I just bought my first lottery ticket with you. So what do you think my odds are?
Just don't get your hopes up. That's it.
Oh, man.
He won from the October 27, 2018 Powerball drawing $343.8 million. He hails from Manhattan. Please help me welcome and congratulate Robert Bailey.
What you do between buying that winning ticket and having Yolanda Vega counting your money can mean the difference between being a lottery success or a cautionary tale. So, who you gonna call?
Hello, this is Jason. Congratulations. What state did you win in? Wonderful, wonderful. Sure, we'll travel anywhere. Yep, we go to California all the time. The initial conversation will kind of address your goals. I'll explain to you my experience. I've seen things go well, I've seen things go bad. We're gonna have a lot of fun with this. Okay, listen, this is what you're gonna do. First, because you're in California, you need to sign the back of the ticket. All right, we can't make you anonymous, so sign the ticket, it'll make it safe. Next thing you need to do is make a copy of the ticket and put it in a very safe place. If you can get it to a safe deposit box, that would be perfect. And now listen to me, what I'm gonna tell you is very important. Do not tell anybody that you won. Yeah, you can tell your wife, you can tell your kids, but make sure they don't tell anybody because it'll be a nightmare. For the more people who know, I'm telling you, I've seen this before, just do not tell anybody. It's gonna be hard not to, but do it.
That was free advice for someone who just got a seat on the gravy train. But for all the aspiring power ballers, going in travel to Rivkin Radler Attorneys at Law in Uniondale, Long Island, for an audience with Jason Kurland, the lottery lawyer. That nickname is well earned.
That checks.
Yep.
245. I'll take this one, please.
There you go.
Now, can we do that chase thing where I take a picture and they just stick it in my account?
What are they gonna do with all this money, Brian?
Spend it! Yeah, right. I couldn't imagine. I could not imagine. Jason, you know more millionaires than Yolanda Vega did.
A lot of my clients are regular players, so they do play every week.
Like years and years worth of.
Yeah, you play a lot. But then again, I've had winners that it's the first time they ever purchased a ticket.
That did not happen.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
I swear.
come on.
I had an Amish person win the lottery, and they told me that they weren't really buying tickets because I don't think they were supposed to buy tickets in there. But you know, they claimed that it was the first time they bought a ticket.
What surprises people most about the process that it takes in dealing with winning a lot of money?
The immediate reaction is jumping up and down, screaming that you're the winner. And then 5 minutes later, it's complete freak out.
Yeah.
Right? They're so nervous. Their lives are changing.
Look at it again.
Yeah, making sure that they, you know, that it is the right ticket.
Right.
And then there's so much responsibility that comes with it. You know, and you're afraid if you have young children, you're afraid for their safety. If you have a big family who, you know, you don't trust them with money, how are you going to deal with them? They don't sleep. I'm telling you, from the time I get the call to the time that, you know, we claim, there's not much sleeping. So,
really?
You know, to be prepared to how to deal with the emotional aspect took me a few winners to understand. And now, you know, now we understand, you know, completely what they're going through.
Over the past decade, Jason has handled over $2 billion in lottery winnings for people all over the United States.
Is there like a thread that runs through, a common trait that you see throughout most or all of your winners, besides them just buying a ticket?
I would say my clients fall into two categories. The ones who are going to spend like drunken sailors who I need to protect against themselves.
Yeah, that's me.
And which are fun. And also fun are the ones that are so afraid to spend a dime and have no idea how rich they are. They're flying coach, you know, they just won $400 million. So, you know, I got to explain to them, you know, you could buy a plane if you really
live a little.
Right,
You're
right.
flying commercial.
Right. So it's like, you know, those are the two clients. I protect the ones that are going to spend too much.
Yeah.
And I kind of try to teach the other ones how to be a wealthy person.
His most recent client? Only the winner of the second largest lottery prize ever. The $1.5 billion Mega Millions jackpot, won by a single ticket holder in South Carolina, who's opted to take the one-time payout of $877,784,124 and remain anonymous.
Governor Cuomo recently made it a law that if you win in New York, you have to come forward. Does that make your job any tougher?
40% of the calls I get, the initial calls, start out with, you know, a fake name. Like, I don't even get the real name. So people are so nervous about that. The lottery wants to sell tickets as a business.
Of course.
So how do they sell tickets? They show that it's legitimate, so that it's not, you know, people who know people who are winning.
Right.
And two, that it's people like you and me who are winning. So you have to come forward. So when you come forward, you can wear a disguise, but there's a fine line because you don't want to look ridiculous because then all of a sudden it goes viral.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to be, you know, just slight
Your whole thing is to get in and out of the news cycle as soon as possible, so you don't get all of the people around you.
And there's an art to it. Right?
Yeah.
You have to say just enough where you give the media a story.
Right, where it's cute and you move on.
Right, and if you're too cryptic about it, people are starting to think, what's going on here? What's going on here? So there's an art to the whole thing.
Outline for us, as you have online, the 5 things that one should do when you find you might be in possession of about $1 billion worth of lottery tickets.
Well, check that ticket again. All right, that's important. It sounds ridiculous, but I've received a number of calls from people who either got one number wrong or were looking at the wrong day. I mean, how bad luck is that? Just make sure you have the winning ticket, because once you start, celebrating and planning your life and you find out that it's not really the win, it's a disaster. That's number 1. The number 2 is stay quiet. Don't tell anybody that you're the winner. The more people that know, the worse it's going to get for you. That time between the win and the claim is your last period of normalcy you're going to have. You want to do it the right way. And during that time, you want to hire the right team of professionals. But another thing I tell people is plan a vacation, especially in those states like New York where you have to do a press conference.
Right.
Plan to go away the day of the press conference.
To avoid people like me.
Yes. The media is going to be at your house, within hours. Not to mention neighbors and friends and family you even know existed. Go right from the press conference to the airport. I'll get you a car. Just go. Yeah. And when you come back, things usually die down. At least you have maybe a couple of weeks to get your head straight.
How much would it take for you to win before you left all of this behind? How big would the jackpot have to be for you to give this up?
I don't think I would stop. I love it. It's so much fun dealing with these winners and helping them through it. I don't think there's no amount of money would make me stop.
So who's gonna play you in the series about the lottery lawyer that is sure to follow?
I have no idea.
Come on, it's
your
your dream casting. You don't have $100 million check with your name on it, but you at least get to pick the guy who's gonna walk around playing.
I'm not saying a name. I'll be made fun of either way if I pick a name.
Just keeping it anonymous.
Keeping it anonymous.
All right, thanks for talking to us.
My pleasure.
I got $1 in a dream. May I have a take 5, please? I'm gonna scratch it with my lucky scratcher. What do I have to do?
Yeah, 3 of a kind.
Okay, we have 2 $20. We need one more 20 to win. Yeah. $40. You lied to me. So, do you ever play the lottery?
Yes.
You do?
Even though I shouldn't.
Yeah. Why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you?
Because being here is like you feel like you're forced to. It feels kind of depressing to like see the same people and see them spend and know that they're not making much.
Not this time. So who's your biggest winner in all of Cepeda history?
I'm not sure because sometimes people win and
they keep it on.
Yeah, exactly. But to me, this is still probably the biggest.
$50,000.
So you're talking about years.
So years worth of playing.
This probably breaks even or not even.
But that person still felt like...
It feels nice that day.
So what do you think would happen if you guys decided, I'm done with the lottery, no more lottery sales here?
I don't know how much of a difference it would make, but the whole reason we probably got this was just to get people to come here. Because whatever we make out here is nothing. It's buying whatever else that helps us.
So what can you teach me about the lottery?
So if you're gonna play every once in a while. The people feel like it's gonna come.
Yeah.
But you can't think of it like that.
Yeah.
I am a first grader. In class, I wait in line to show my teacher, Miss Miller, my assignment. You sure do have a lot of shoes, she says. I want you to name every pair of shoes you have. I managed to recall 10 pairs, the black and white polka dotted ones with a bow tie, the buckled ruby red ones, the salmon pink lace-ups. 10 pairs is an awful lot. The next day in class, Miss Miller calls me back to her desk. You didn't mention you had white shoes. That evening, I tell Mama what happened. Who does she think she is? Get your coat and let's go. Mama takes my hand and leads me to the children's shoe department. She points to a pair of yellow patent leather shoes. Those are pretty. Nonchalantly, Mama opens her wallet, pulls out a $100 bill, and pays for the shoes, while the saleswoman looks at her the way Miss Miller looked at me. You're going to wear these to school tomorrow, and you better tell that damn teacher of yours that you actually have a dozen pair of shoes. The next day, I wear my brand new shoes with a matching yellow knit dress. Nervous as I walk up to my teacher's desk, I announce, Miss Miller, I have 12 pairs of shoes. She looks down at my feet and then levels those blue eyes at my face. Sit down.
The children's shoe department at Saks Fifth Avenue, Detroit, is a world away from the Jim Crow Tennessee of the 1950s. In that decade alone, more than 1.1 million Black Americans made their way up north to cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit, with dreams of civil liberty and economic prosperity. The reality that awaited them was a harsh wake-up call.
My mom, her family had been in Nashville for generations. Her grandfather was born into slavery there. So they had deep roots in Nashville. My mom didn't understand struggle at all at that point. So why would she leave Nashville? She and my dad and my 3 older siblings, because they wanted some liberties. Even though Nashville was comfortable, my mom couldn't vote there. Her daughters couldn't go to a decent school. And then they got to Michigan, and lo and behold, they were not prepared. For the first time in their lives, they were in poverty. It was debilitating. And my mother thought, oh no. No, that's not what I'm made of. I have to make a way out of no way.
That way turned out to be an operation that made Fannie Davis a one-of-a-kind businesswoman, sole proprietor of an enterprise that would sustain the mother of 4 and her family over the next 40 years, and aroused the suspicion of a nosy first-grade teacher.
I could just feel that this is not a good situation because I have a big secret, and this feels as though she's getting close to something I'm not supposed to tell.
Not supposed to tell about her mother's numbers-running operation.
Well, my mom was really smart and a quick study, and she had a motivation. She needed to figure something out. She saw her neighbors playing the numbers, and she thought they could turn those numbers into me. She was the only woman. The numbers are this ubiquitous experience in Black culture. The numbers started in Harlem in the 1920s by one man who came up with this elegant system. It's simple. You just take 3 digits and you decide to play them in a particular combination and you hope they come out. When you played $1, you could win 500.
Yeah.
You know, this game helped people in Harlem during the Depression. Fast forward, it's been throughout all of these communities in Black culture.
While business was good, it also kept her mom on the wrong side of the law.
My mother made it clear to all of us in her words and in her actions that this business was legitimate. It just happened to be illegal.
Explain the numbers business to me as you saw it manifest in your life.
It started with hearing my mother on the phone and watching her take her customers' bets. 4-2 for a quarter, 6-9-3 straight for 50 cents. Is this both races, Miss Queenie? Hearing that rhythmic sort of like way that she would repeat each number, that was like a daytime lullaby for me. It was a way of knowing everything was right in the world because she was running her business.
I was wondering if you've ever heard a criticism of the numbers that actually gave you pause.
The criticism that would get to my mom a lot would be that it's exploitative, that people like her were preying on folks who had problems with gambling. She didn't see that happen because Detroit had a bunch of Black folks working for the auto industry, and they were doing pretty well. They were solidly working and middle-class folks who were using their extra money to do what they wanted to do for pleasure.
And for a lot of them, it was playing numbers.
Yeah.
So this idea that if you play, you somehow are spending money you shouldn't spend is a way, I think, that some people like to legislate black pleasure.
Revenue from the numbers fueled an entire parallel economy, where black dollars were redistributed to business, cultural, and social causes that benefited communities of color.
The NAACP and the National Urban League were fledgling numbers men in all the major cities, fueled those like institutions and gave them the resources so that they could survive. You know, the numbers were brought to Detroit by a man named John Roxborough. He also was Joe Lewis's manager. He took all that money he made in the numbers and he invested in Joe Louis, who became the heavyweight champion of the world. And Joe Louis is a hometown hero, but he's an American hero. And I'm telling you, I don't think he would exist without that numbers money.
What scale of money?
Millions and millions.
Literally millions, and this is in the 50s and 60s,
Yes. Yeah, all the way
millions
through,
of dollars
through the 70s as well.
in the black community.
Yes, and it was a true underground economy. Just imagine those dollars circulating over and over and over in the
these
black
10
community.
square blocks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what does that do? It helps small businesses. When you have thriving businesses, then you have folks who feel good about living in that community. They stay put. They take care of their homes. They want their children in good schools. They can advocate for that because they're living in the community and they care about it. It spreads out and provides a kind of stability that we don't really see today.
The money was rolling in, and the powers that be took notice and eventually took action.
It thrived for 60 years until the legal lottery stepped in to replicate the same game. What's fascinating is in New York, activists and local politicians and even Congress members fought back. They were like, this is our economy. Even though it's illegal, don't take it from us. But it didn't work. Ultimately, the state was able to take it over because voters decided they would legalize it.
In what ways are you your mother's child?
I understand what it means to be a gambler. And my mother was fundamentally a gambler, not in the way you might think. She wasn't someone who got excited about gambling, but she was a gambler with her life. I do take risks. I do gamble with dreams that I have, and I don't have any qualms about that. As she told me, if it's for something that valuable, then the risk is worth it.
Thanks for going in with us on the lottery. To catch past episodes, visit us on the web at youtube.com/Bric TV. Bye now.
As per U.S. law, any child bought or sold into the sex trade is a victim of human trafficking.
Why is the first time I'm hearing about this?
On the same websites where you sell a couch, there are sections to buy people.
Really?
And up to half of these victims are boys. There is no such thing as a child prostitute, only a victim of exploitation. And it could be anyone.
She's talking about me. Should I say something?
Since the recession of 2008, Brooklyn's median income has been on the rise. That wealth, however, has not been spread equally. But just how unequal is it? 1 in 5 Brooklyn households has a median income of over $100,000 per year, while 1 in 5 receives food stamp benefits. In 2017, Brooklyn foreclosure rates doubled from the year before. 15% of Brooklyn student loan borrowers are late on their payments. There's more. Brooklyn ranks number 1 in total children living in poverty in New York City. Over 30% of renters spend more than half of their income on rent. How do we change the numbers? What are the solutions? Share your story at Bric's Be Heard Town Hall on economic inequality. Hello and welcome to Bric TV's Be Heard Town Hall, the widening gap, economic inequality in New York City. Just now, in the 2 seconds it took me to welcome you, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos made about $6,364. That's nearly a quarter of the $28,446 that made up the median Amazon worker's salary in 2017. Nope, this is not going to be the Amazon HQ No Thank You Hour. That show has already been canceled. But yes, there will be some frank talk about the stark contrast between the 1% and the rest of us. We'll also get into the gray areas of economic inequality and maybe even go some places that may feel a little bit uncomfortable for you. Because what's more personal than you and your money? So what'd you take home last year? How much do you think your boss makes, or that coworker who calls in sick every other Monday? Are we part of an intentionally invisibilized community of inequality, becoming student debtors before ever stepping foot onto a campus? How do the stigma of debt and the structure of racism, sexism, and class show up in our lives and in our heads as we make our way through this city? It's a lot of questions, but not a lot of time, so we've invited some of the smartest people we know to help us begin to unravel it all. But before we meet them, let's get these house lights up in the room and maybe start with a little question and put a little town in the town hall right from the beginning. Like I said, it may get a little personal or uncomfortable for just a second, but we're gonna work past that as a community. This is our 17th time in this room together talking about the issues that matter to Brooklyn. So just a nice general question from my community here at the town hall. How do you see economic inequality manifest itself in Brooklyn as we stand here and sit here tonight? So who's going to be the first brave soul to give me their uncommon economic indicator or share something about how economic inequality has shown up in your life, in someone you love, where you work, something you saw on the news? I'm gonna keep making up things until somebody indicates at any point that they want to share. I see you shaking your head over there. Don't make me come over there. Yep, front row. I know who you are. And I think maybe we'll get a word from you, Ms. Rosenthal. So economic inequality, it's gotta be something on your mind, and as you work with people in Brooklyn, serving them every day. So stand up and talk to me for 1 second. This is, of course, our Representative Helen Rosenthal. Not to put you on the spot there, but economic inequality in New York City, specifically in Brooklyn. What does it really look like?
What came to mind for me, I'm now the chair of the Committee on Women in the City Council, and what came to mind to me was a hearing that we had last year about the morbidity and mortality of women in childbirth and the huge disparity between Black and white women. Black women are still 8 times more likely to die in New York City compared to white women. And when you start to peel back the onion and think about why, a lot of it has to do with income disparity, but a lot of it still has to do with the intersection of racism and sexism.
Well, we are happy, thank you, that you're here and to inhabit all of those intersections beyond that, and of course paying respect to that. So I'm gonna jump in right with you guys. This is a sort of hard one to get at. The last time we were all together, we talked about NYCHA, and there's some very specific point of entry there. But when you talk about economic inequality, people might not immediately get that glimmer, that it is the headline that you read about infant mortality or morbidity and moms giving birth to children. So I'm gonna go to each of our panelists and just let you know who they are right now by way of asking a question about that entry point into this discussion on economic inequality. I'm looking at New York City Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, J. Philip Thompson. He's an expert in urban politics and also coalition building. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, looking at this city as a whole, as you're tasked to do, from the standpoint of someone who's concerned with those things and making the city function better for all of its people, how do you make your way into this economic inequality question?
I think of it in terms of democracy. America was founded on the idea that we wouldn't have an aristocracy the way Britain did. Capitalism, when Adam Smith conceived of it, was meant to prevent an aristocracy, an economic aristocracy. That was the belief at the time. And in the last 25 years, we see the emergence of a billionaire class and huge wealth disparities. But we still are a democracy. So I think economic inequality really reflects that there's something wrong in our democracy, and that the people are not really making the rules. The people are not really awake. And so I think that's where we need to make change, because we have a peaceful way to do that, and many countries don't. And when you have this kind of inequality, there's often a lot of bloodshed, and we should not go that way. I think we should actually make democracy work for the people.
Thanks. I'm looking at Dr. Guillermina Jasso, who we're going to call Willie tonight. Thanks for joining us, Willie. Dr. Jasso is the professor of sociology and Silver Professor of Arts and Sciences, and she studies socio-behavioral theory, distributive justice, status, and international immigration and inequality, among other things. So from your standpoint as an academic who's been doing this work since you were PhD'd in 1974, why do you think income and economic inequality are having a moment right now?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and all my colleagues all over the world are trying to answer it. All right, so rather than join that chorus right now, what I'd like to do is two things. The first is just to remind us that inequality manifests itself in two ways. One way is inequality manifests itself in two ways. One of them is as the differences across all the individuals in a group. The other is as gaps between subsets of the group, for example, between men and women or between races, etc. It turns out that under certain conditions, the two are linked, and that is a prime topic to study and also to be concerned about right now. And the second thing that I want to mention at the outset is that a lot of my recent work has been focused on what persons can do as individuals in their daily lives to reduce inequality. And hopefully this will come back. But I'm thinking of this as an adjunct to what societies can do, what all the macro levers that can be pushed. Right. And so hopefully we can return to that.
Oh, we'll return to it. We invited you for a reason. All right. Helena Lynn is here tonight. She comes to us. You can read her in the Washington Post partisan opinion blogs or her book, Pound Foolish. Thanks for joining us, Helene.
Thank you.
We know that you're writing about economic inequality and other issues of pertinence in that field all the time. So just from your standpoint as a working journalist who's doing this work where journalism meets inequality reporting, what's your point of entry here?
My point of entry is a couple of different ways. Depends on what I'm writing that day. But one of the things I've become very fascinated by is various things in our society that we don't think of as being caused by inequality, but in fact are a huge part of the issue of inequality. Last week, I wrote a piece about bullying in the culture, which I think we could all agree is a huge issue in our culture. Well, it turns out that actually bullying is a huge thing in cultures where there's a lot of inequality. Cultures that have less inequality have less bullying. This is something you wouldn't necessarily think about, but in fact, you could study it and you could do cross-cultural, and cross-national comparisons, and sure enough, you see it. We're closer to the Soviet Union than we are to Western Europe, for example. Another place where you really see this pick up is in, we have, Americans still mostly think they can get ahead on their, on their merits, right? We really believe hard work and it will work out for you. We have a whole self-help industry that actually is not as prevalent in other countries. Again, this is something that very much correlates with inequality. Countries where there's more inequality tend to believe that people can get ahead in work versus countries where people are more equal. People will actually say, no, it is really hard if somebody comes from a lower income background to get ahead. And I actually was talking to some sociologists about this week and economists, and the theory is inequality leads to isolation in the society, right? Where you let less and less people who are not like you. And then you are, say, Ivanka Trump saying, oh no, nobody needs guaranteed jobs or guaranteed income because everybody can get ahead in the society, seemingly unaware that, wait a second, you inherited, depending on whether you believe Donald Trump or not, $1 billion or multi-million-dollar fortune, right? So that's sort of where I come into it.
Thank you for that. Dr. Toni Lewis is here. She's the founder and president of Liberation Health Strategies and the former chair of the SEIU Healthcare. So, Dr. Toni, you come to us as both a physician and a labor leader and organizer. So looking at that intersection right there, I'm sure it just speaks volumes, but what is the point of entry that you bring to this discussion of economic inequality?
Well, so many things, and thank you for asking. I'm so glad to be here. I'm also thinking about coming to this discussion as a Black woman. From many generations of Black women, and that when we talk about economic inequality, I mean, we've got 400 years of, systems, policy, practice, and culture that marginalizes and devalues the work of people of color, of Black people, Indigenous people. So although we're having this discussion about the widening gap, it's been wide for centuries and centuries and centuries with intention. And so it's, I'm excited about this moment to really have this discussion where we can figure out how to break down that system, understanding that it's not by accident. The second thing that I think about as a Black woman, hearing kind of the first comment from the audience being about our maternal mortality and the stats in Brooklyn, is that as a physician on the front lines of political strategy, here and around the globe, how it hurts to not have security in your economy. What it feels like to wonder if you're going to be able to put, the right food on your kid's table or take them to the right school, or even, all of the different ways that it gets at your body and your family. So I feel sometimes the discussion around economic inequality or economics or finances or debt can feel a little bit left brain, but it really is personal to so many people in my neighborhood in Bed-Stuy and, all around the world.
Thank you for that. Dr. Jonas Shanda is coming to us from our partners at the Fiscal Policy Institute on this evening. He's their chief economist. The Fiscal Policy Institute, of course, is a nonpartisan, independent organization that is focused on improving public policy and private practice to deliver better economic and social conditions for all New Yorkers. I like to just, in my head, think of you as the activist economist. So in that form, how do you see your role and point of entry into the economic inequality discussion?
Well, it's very, I think, interesting to be an economist in this time because, the activist economists are kind of like, like a philosopher with a hammer, right? You got to really understand how things work. And I think it's a very important economic question of who gets what and how do they get it? And do they get what they get by accident, or is there a system of distribution that is fundamentally flawed and broken as the economy moves on, as the economy is growing? How do we get similar outcomes across economies, across different countries that are so uneven and so unfair. And I think this is something that we think about a lot, and we think about at the Institute about ways of fixing that in our own way. And of course, we're very happy to be part of this discussion. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. You got a ways to go. Natalia Abrams is here. She's the executive director of the Student Debt Crisis and an advocate working towards solutions that provide affordable, accessible, and quality educations for all students. That's all students seeking a college degree without getting some crippling debt hanging around their neck by the time they finish. So I think your point of entry to this discussion is pretty clear, but let the people know who you are.
So I went back to school as a non-traditional student. That means I was over 25. And I quickly noticed there was something going on because college was double the price it should have been when I was 18. Yeah. So right away, we were starting to talk about the crisis. Just to add, I think we're talking about this because we're really starting to see white people affected, and that's why we're hearing this much more, to build on your point, and why it's this, critical mass. But, for myself, right after I graduated, they rose tuition 40%, even though it had been doubled over the previous 10 years. And that was my entry, and starting to get to the bottom of the point and figure out who was actually causing this. From my point of view, it's the Department of Education was never intended to be a bank, and we have non-bankers, in charge of $1.5 trillion for 45 million borrowers, and there's 3 million of you in New York that are suffering every day.
Absolutely. Many of us in this very room. So thank you, number one, for all of you being here, but looking at all of these various points of entry, we're all sort of arriving at the same place. And we're sitting here in Brooklyn now where 3 people who I can name right now, chiefly Warren Buffett, I'm thinking of the Microsoft man, help me out, people.
Gates.
You know him. See? Why should you know him? Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Jeff Bezos collectively have the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of Americans. 3 men hold the same amount of wealth as 160 Americans. That's the scales being balanced. So, how did we get to this point? This sort of tipping point that seems where the pitchforks aren't quite coming out, as you talked about how things change and there's usually a lot of blood that happens before things become level. But as we're sitting here right now, how did America get to such an uneven point?
Well, again, I want to go back to democracy. Between 2008 and 2014, the federal government provided $27 trillion in bailout money or credit supports for the financial industry. That money could have gone to make tuitions free, to make community colleges. It could have gone for affordable housing. It could have gone for job training. It could have gone for making America green. All those things. So why didn't people fight for that? And I loved Obama, but Obama gave Wall Street $27 trillion. There was other options were on the table, but where was the pressure for that? Carter G. Woodson said in 1932, when he wrote The Miseducation of the Negro, they said if they miseducate you, they don't need chains to tie you up. You'll tie yourself up. Yeah. And we're tied up. One other thing I'd say, $72 billion a year in New York State for Medicaid, 7 million people in New York State and Medicaid, 1 in 2 people in Brooklyn on Medicaid. There's not a single Medicaid organization of the people who are on Medicaid in New York State or in the United States of America. And that's $72 billion a year of the people's money with no voice from the people whatsoever. So what's broken in my mind is our democracy, and we have to awaken the people. I don't care about Gates, I don't care about Buffett. The problem is actually our democracy. And if our democracy is working, Buffett doesn't have an army last time I checked, neither does Gates. They don't even have a police force. The power is really with the people, and so we have to learn how to exercise that. And no one's going to teach us how to do that because that's disempowering from the people who are benefiting. We have to do that ourselves.
So Willie, looking at the historical perspective, you can clap for that. Take a dab. But looking at this historical perspective and hearing these figures and knowing where we are now, looking at the arc, how far do you think we are away from a people's uprising to say, okay, we have had enough?
Well, that's another very good question. As you know, forever and ever, philosophers have said it is inequality that leads to unfairness, that leads to these horrific consequences for person and society. I don't want to foretell anything, but I do think we are already in danger zones. We're already in danger zones when we talk about health, when we, as Tony and others are doing, when we talk about the student debt, as Natalia, everything that everyone else here is saying. Moreover, something important happens. You know, there's this old idea that if you take two people at random from a group, say from a city or a borough or a nation, and then look at the disparity, economic disparity between them, that tells you something about the fabric of the society. And that's something for all of us to keep in mind. We want a world in which we are close, in some sense, to everyone. Now, before leaving, before turning this over to someone else, let me just say that in addition to some of the names that you mentioned, there are some wonderful role models out there. Think of Chuck Feeney, billionaire, you know, who gave everything away. Think of all the people who take vows of poverty, the people in religious orders, the nuns who taught me in school and in college. So there are things on both sides of the ledger that we can usefully reflect on.
So, Dr. Tony, I'm looking at you as the former chair over at SEIU. You were heading up about 1.1 million folks here and in Canada. So you know from unions, what is it going to take before people get organized with this common theme of standing up for abolishing inequality, essentially?
So yay to abolishing and yay to on and popping with unions, because man, I've been pretty excited. Have you guys been following the teachers around the country and what's been going on there? Yes. Yeah, shout out to the teachers. You know, shout out to, you know, all the fast food workers, the Fight for 15. Shout out to folks who have been raising up, and you can trace that back to so many different things, you know, whether you want to talk about Occupy Wall Street or, you know, the Arab Spring. There's a lot that we could talk about in terms of how that awakenness, that thing has been awakened, that allows people to hit the streets and fight for their dignity. But before that, like this story that was told that you were less than, you know, if you were in debt, like I think, you know, for a while kept a lot of people out of the streets or even talking about it. Like folks would not talk about their debt, you know, or income or economic inequality, because it's like, I did something wrong. I'm not paying my bills. And so what I love about, you know, and I'm a third generation union gal. Like my mom, my grandmom fought for teachers in Milwaukee and Southern Illinois and all over. So I know the power of being in collective community and kind of sharing the stories of like, wait, this ain't right. What we gonna do? You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's kind of the basic, like, wait, this ain't right. What we gonna do together is like at its best in the kind of A. Philip Randolph, like, you know, Black people of color trade unionism model, like a way to kind of start pushing that envelope and get it on and popping in the streets. Like, I think that's like an exciting thing to do. But like, you know, one of the things that was exciting about this last year's political cycle was when Leader Stacey Abrams was running for governor down in Georgia. Thank you, that beautiful state of Georgia. And I'm on the leadership committee with her, working on her campaign. And for a while, people said she wasn't qualified to run for governor because she had debt. Because she had debt, she was not qualified to run for governor. And when she came out and said, look, I have a debt because I'm a normal Black woman who's taking care of my family and paid this and all those things, there were people that met her in the streets. And I think that turned on a collective understanding in a different way of like this wait, maybe something's not right. How are we going to get together and change this? Again, that kind of conversation that has happened at union tables and organizing tables all over the world for centuries. So, I mean, I see hope in this moment as we kind of pull the veil back on all of those kind of secrets that made people feel like they were less than and didn't have a voice in it. And unions absolutely at the center, and domestic workers, and teachers, and mamas, and all of it.
So this is the Be Heard Town Hall, in case you wonder where you were. So if you do have a question or some insight that you would like to impart, meet me in the aisle. So we're gonna keep things rolling, but I see you all have cards there. So if something has sparked something and you wanna jump in with the question for these fine folks, please, like I said, meet me in either of these aisles. But on the same steam of this, using the Abrams example and her coming out of the shadows in a way to say, oh, listen, this is real life. I have debt because I have bills, I have a life, and I don't have a mountain of family wealth to draw from. How many of us are walking around not realizing that we are in fact poor because we are too ashamed to admit we're not millionaires in waiting, that we just haven't hit yet that there is a problem and it's not about the lack of effort that you are putting forward?
It is a huge issue, and there's something, and Georgia's a really good example because it was always interesting that Stacey Abrams, a black woman, was demonized for this because the governor she was replacing almost declared bankruptcy in 2010 because one of his children, I think it was a daughter, and her husband got into a major business mess with a store that failed and closed. And I think, if I'm remembering the story right, the previous governor had somehow guaranteed some of the loans on it. He almost landed in bankruptcy court. It was like this close. And somehow this was not an issue. It came up for like a day, and then people just dropped it, right? Because, of course, he was helping his kid, and he was a guy, and, you know, he must know what he was doing. Whereas with Stacey Abrams, as we know, this came up constantly. She had student debt, she had credit card debt. But I want to go back to the democracy point, because I think there's something that hasn't come up here, and it ties into the billionaire factor. And it's 3 words: campaign finance reform.
Yes, absolutely.
This is huge. Income inequality in this country, the gap starts opening in the mid-1970s. And something else happens in the mid-1970s, too. We change a lot of the ways we start financing our political campaigns. And while the income inequality gap is almost worldwide at this point, in fact, in the United States, it's much worse than in other comparable countries. And one of the major reasons for this is because of the way we finance our campaigns, because politicians listen to the people with the checkbooks. And they meet with these people, they talk to these people, they see these people, they see them as their peers, and as a result, they start to veer in that direction. Money buys access, and you see that in Washington, where we have studies that show that the typical aide on the Hill believes that Americans are much more conservative than they are economically, because this is who they're hearing from. We see it in New York City, where real estate interests have much more power than any of us. And you just see it across the board. And I think this is becoming an issue. We can see it. We can see campaigns nationally have gotten a lot of attention. I think we know who I'm talking about, where they have refused to take, money. From these corporate interests. But this has to be addressed, because if it's not addressed, it's the issues in it of itself, the student loan problems, the debt problems, the bankruptcy problems, they're not going to be addressed either.
You had something?
I want to agree with that, but I also want to tie it back to something Dr. Lewis said. And I want to do that by way of commenting on Bernie Sanders in his last campaign. When asked what is a model of where he thinks America needs to go, he said Denmark. I want to disagree with that. Denmark is 91% Danish. It's not even diverse for Scandinavia. In America, I think race is the divide that the economic inequality rides on, and it's fundamental. So every time working people are about to come together, all of a sudden wealthy people fund a racist like Donald Trump or somebody else to divide them, and it works. So you mentioned campaign finance reform. Citizens United, which was the Supreme Court case that freed up all kinds of corporate money going into politics, was based on the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was an amendment passed after the Civil War to protect former slaves from being re-enslaved by state governments.
Right.
But what happened was wealthy folks funded the former Confederates to destroy Reconstruction after the Civil War, murder activists who were fighting for black voting rights and so on, and black folks ended up being segregated for 100 years after the Civil War, which was fought to end slavery. And the Supreme Court that was installed after murdering all kinds of activists and a sitting president said the 14th Amendment wasn't really there to protect black folks. They can be resegregated. They said corporations are legal persons and therefore entitled to the protection of the 14th Amendment. Yeah. So corporations ended up with the rights that were supposed to be for former slaves. And we are still acting like that's legitimate today. And so I just think we got a race problem in America, and until there's a belief that everybody's equal and we all gotta be together, we're not gonna be able to unite around the economy. And we gotta deal with this in order to be able to take on a Trump or take on inequality.
So, please. Now, Natalia was the first person to bring up, now that's a white folks problem is everybody's problem. So that's a point of entry for this.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, you threw me off. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that we started to get impacted, you know, my life as a lower middle class family was pretty happy, and I don't think that's the same, and I'm not even 40 yet. And so I think we've started to see it for white people definitely in the 2000s, and that's why it is being talked about all the time, but it's something that's been going on for 400 years since the dawn of our country. It seemed to start to work where people were shouting out and coming to the streets with Occupy Wall Street, where we were moving away from race issues and into actually income inequality, and they shut that down real fast. So he's absolutely right. The moment we actually all come together and fight the 1%, that's when they want to shut us down. But there's more of us than them, and we have to constantly remind ourselves of that. And so we can't get shut down, but there's more energy than ever before. I've been hitting the streets since the early 2000s, and I can't believe the number of people. It feels like we were playing protest in 2000 compared to now.
So I don't know, call me cynical. I don't think a little debt is going to erase out foundational principles of racism that this country continues to thrive on. But I'm wondering, if you have 44 million debtors just in the student loan context who are responsible for over $1 trillion, is that enough to start coalition building? Just because 44 million of us owe $1 trillion, does that at least crack a door for people to start seeing each other outside of the context of, okay, there's some people who have a lot of money and influence and corporations are people, but this is a little spark between us from an organizing way?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And as you were asking before, I think so many student loan borrowers, especially the ones that go on to graduate college, they don't realize they're poor yet. They just left a great party at college, but they probably had great amenities, and they didn't realize they were on the road to poverty with a ton of student loan debt. So as they're waking up and they're seeing those $30,000, $40,000, $100,000 loan balances, I think that is enough to wake up 45 million people, or at least 20 million of those people that are in total distress.
As an organizer, if you got 44 million, you better do something. You know what I mean?
We got it.
Even right? Even if you're just like, you know, playing Uno, whatever it is, like 44 million should allow you to have a good party, or, you know. And it's interesting because I was just at Power Rising, which was this conference in New Orleans, convening a lot of amazing Black women around, you know, all of our issues. And I was speaking with one of the AFT national leaders, Dr. Loretta Johnson, and she had done a whole session on education and on all the things. And like, I love sitting at the feet of my elders to kind of hear, because, you know, Deputy will tell you that like these are cycles. You know, there'll be like this rising in 68, and, you know, everyone was talking about let's change the world and art, and then here comes the Lewis Powell moment that like gets into, you know, rising, you know, lifting and centering the Chamber of Commerce and changing things on universities. All of these things that continue to happen, but getting back to Dr. Loretta Johnson, like she was like, oh, I think we really do need to get on the student debt crisis thing. And when you start hearing it and seeing like even the little memes on social media that's like, hey, you know, if one of the furloughed workers wants to just erase all the student debt, good luck, do that. We are all behind that. Or, you know, all of the things where it's starting to kind of get into our culture, you know, and it's getting beyond us and into all of the other conversations. I feel like, yes, there is an opportunity to throw that 44 million person party and change some things.
Well, while we look for that opportunity to manifest itself, there are some people who are doing amazing work right now in New York City, helping people who have already gotten caught in traps of debt and fees and all sorts of things they didn't anticipate as they grew up and moved into the real world. And we've produced one of those stories to share with you.
The work that I do is primarily to represent low-income New Yorkers who are facing debt collection lawsuits where the debt involved is debt related to a landlord-tenant relationship. Most of the time I end up working with a lot of immigrants just because a lot of the people in New York who are most at risk of ending up in potentially exploitative landlord-tenant relationships and who are also struggling working New Yorkers tend to be immigrants. People who don't have documented status in the United States. It's very common for landlords to charge exorbitant rents. I've also seen and had cases where people are asked to pay money up front that actually the rent stabilization laws forbid landlords from charging. There are certain things that all tenants in New York City should do, like, for example, keeping copies of all leases and rent receipts for at least 6 years, to take pictures of an apartment before you leave, you know, just sort of simple things that you can do as much as possible to protect yourself.
In like the 2008 time, I had plenty of middle income folks coming into our clinics just like devastated financially. But as a result of marketing on the part of banks and other providers of credit that really targeted low-income communities with subprime lending practices similar to the housing market, and they were easy prey because wages are lowering or not rising, the cost of living is rising, and in order to make ends meet, many people often do turn to credit. It destabilizes entire communities.
You can look at it after you're done too. Yeah, I think it should be fine. Because basically we just want people to know that there are time limits for them to protect themselves.
Yeah. Mostly the communities that are most affected are low income communities, communities of color here in New York. You know, these debt collectors target these communities thinking that they don't know. I think the first step is really talking about that debt and that there's like an issue because again, going back to the debt being like a stigma, people might not want to talk about it. I think it's just with knowledge, right? Like getting the community to kind of be more thoughtful and conscious about this and how it affects our communities the most, and then come together.
So I just want to recognize one of the folks that was featured in that video who's out there doing the work of educating people, and she's here tonight from CPD. Thank you so much for letting us take a picture and showing up. So we have a question.
Hi, I wanted to know your thoughts on a universal basic income and what solutions that would bring to people, but also what criticisms that people have about that. And I'm curious about the criticisms not on like, you know, do you believe everyone should, but it's like economic implications of what it means if everybody had a basic income, especially in the United States where we have a unique race problem, and especially in New York City where income inequality is so, dramatic compared to other places. And I'm curious about it on like a micro level, like what that would mean for an individual person's life, like what kind of life choices they make and what kind of opportunities open up on a micro level, but then also like what our economy looks like. What is, capitalism look like in 20 years if everyone has a basic income, where it just kind of fundamentally changes a lot of the things that make up the American economy. So I just wanted to hear thoughts about that.
So we've gotten to the universal basic income issue. The one thing that we could say, Dr. King, Richard Nixon, Rumsfeld, who else? Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, even Elon Musk are all getting at this as some type of solution. I'm looking at you, chief economist over there.
Yeah, well, it's gaining some popularity now because I think, for wrong reasons, in my opinion. Look, we can come up with any policy, but what's important is what we're trying to solve. What kind of problems are we trying to solve? And the main way of getting at the UBI is that the structure of our economy is going to change, that half of our jobs are going to be outsourced and automated and will disappear altogether. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? We had the operators in the elevators, and they're gone, and we don't miss them really. So what's important for us to know is what is going to happen, and if some jobs are going to get obsoleted, out of existence, and maybe some new jobs are going to appear. So it may not be even necessary to have the UBI. Now, it could mean that with new economy, we're going to have higher productivity, and that's a good thing. We're going to be more productive if we can translate that into more free time or longer vacations, and that's also possible. So
but to be clear, all those Walmart greeters who got laid off aren't now going to become coders and be Bitcoin billionaires in their mom's basement. So there's got to be some kind of
that is true. That is true, because the other way of getting at the UBI is that we're spending a lot of money on the social safety net. So people who propose the UBI in its clear form, they're trying to substitute one with the other. So let's get rid of all the welfare, let's get rid of all the food stamps and everything, and just have the UBI instead of that. And they want to save money by doing that. This may not be necessarily the optimal solution. It is a possible choice, but it's not a be-all, end-all. It's not going to end poverty. It's not going to solve problems and cure cancer. It's just one of the things that we can do, not more.
So the country will not have met its responsibility until everyone in the nation is assured an income no less than the officially recognized definition of poverty. So that's from 1970 with 5 of America's most famous economists and about 1,200 other co-signing economists. And it appeared on the front page of the New York Times. And now we're here talking about the validity of the argument, and something that Nixon even tried out in Seattle. They had a little pilot program, the sign and dime thing. You're shaking your head.
Listen, it's about power. We can sit up here and come up with 1,000 different schemes, UBI, DGI, whatever you want to say. It's about power. And if you're comfortable with letting a bunch of wealthy people decide how many pennies they want to throw people who don't have a job and who don't have power, as long as it's above the poverty line, if that's comfortable with you, then you can talk about UBI. Of course. We have to figure out how the millions of people who are shareholders in companies actually run those companies. We got to figure out how workers, Jeff Bezos said he wouldn't even consider allowing workers in Amazon to have a union.
Yeah.
Since when do we have an aristocrat who can tell in a democracy what a worker, who they can associate with and what they can talk about? If they want to form a church, a glee club, or a union, that's their right, because this is a democracy. And until we start building power to determine who makes the decisions, we're going to be where we are. And without power and without education, we will not transform technology. It will be something that hurts us, not helps us. And the same goes for any industry you want to talk about. UBI is a diversion. We need to be talking about organizing, not UBI.
So Helene, I know you evoked Ivanka Trump in the beginning of this whole forum, and she has her ideas on UBI, but I don't think that they comport with organizing to overthrow.
No, I mean, the thing I want to say is I'm going to say two contradictory things. First, we actually do have a form of UBI for some people in this country. It's called family wealth and inheritance. It's a huge thing for people like Ivanka Trump. So we do have it, and it does to some extent improve their lives, okay? On the other hand, I'm going to point out everything that was just said here is completely valid. UBI is diversion, as you put it. It is complete and utter diversion. The fact of the matter is we don't know what the job market is going to do going forward. Huge investments in things like a Green New Deal can completely revolutionize what we do for a living, what we work at, because that has happened in the past. The fact is also that the way we work is kind of really screwy in this country right now, where we either have people who are working at the upper ends 50, 60 hours a week, and other people who can barely get 10 or 20 hours at a fast food restaurant or at some other low-wage establishment. And and all of these things need to really be up for discussion as part of, say, a jobs guarantee, which I would support faster than I would support UBI.
Do you have something to say about this, Willie?
Well, a couple of things. Let me go back to the deputy mayor's emphasis on democracy, because I think he is exactly correct. Some of the dimensions of democracy are really important, believe it or not, for reducing inequality. This has been shown in mathematical models. These dimensions include the more voters, the better. Okay? Other things the same. The greater the suffrage, the better. This puts us in mind of rules for persons who have been in prison, for example. Okay? Secondly, independence of mind. If everyone who votes their own mind, not what someone else is telling them to do, and by the way, secret ballots are really, really important in this, then that has the potential to reduce inequality. Finally, any time that there is an option for distributing a rebate, a windfall, a bonus, if that is distributed equally to everybody, equal amounts, inequality is diminished, but not otherwise. So these are simple little things that are rooted in democracy and that can help reduce inequality. Now, one other point, because Deputy Mayor also said a very important thing about race and power, and everyone else here added to it. There's this old idea that if you don't value the things that the powerful people value, then they lose their power. Now, obviously, we can't go to the extreme. I mean, we have to value shelter, we have to value clothing, we have to value food. But then there's all the other things. And so mindfulness about what we value and where we spend our money, okay? Too often, the money that we spend ends up making people at the upper end richer. And so that's something that we need to explore more deeply and think about more deeply.
So I'm hearing some things that seem very prescriptive, to be mindful about where and how we spend our money and what it is that we value, and also about the merits of true democracy and suffrage. So can we put some action verbs to those things? I get that voting is something and knowing what your values are, but how can we in this room and every wave that disseminates from here take a concerted effort to move the needle and show where our values are and begin to vote in a way that makes that vision of equality a reality, that's not a theoretical thing?
Well, I study how people behave and how they think, and I stay away from prescribing or advocating. However, I have not been shy about saying things such as, If you do X, inequality will diminish. It's up to you whether you do X.
Including marrying up.
Yes. And marrying down. This
Yep.
is Plato's prescription, for negative assortative mating. Let the rich marry poor, and inequality will be reduced. And it's true.
So where can we have one of these mixers, economists?
Well, you see, it's an interesting one. Well, you see, I would like to call out of the economic profession. The economists have been quite lousy as a discipline altogether when it comes to promoting all these ideas. Well, for instance, you see, we can do quite a lot. The politicians, of course, make the decisions, and it's not just about the voters who vote them in. It's also about the policy people who talk to them and who they listen to, well, sometimes. When it comes to understanding how the economy works, economists aren't the best. A good example, for instance, is the Fight for 15. We had this several years ago. It was a very useful and very successful measure. Now we have a $15 minimum wage in New York City. So it's a good thing for all of us. It does reduce economic inequality, but if you go back in time and just look at all the articles, the economists were saying it's going to be a disaster, the job market is going to collapse, bad things will happen, and they didn't happen, right? So knowing how the economy is going to behave if you do a sudden and brave and positive policy move is a very important thing. And economists have been behind the curve on that. So I welcome you all to come to the Fiscal Policy Institute website. We have a lot of good ideas. Read them there. Just a little bit of a side note. But it's very important to know how the economy is going to behave. So we can do quite a lot, even the way things are. Mm-hmm. Second point is, you see, economic inequality is not a sudden thing, right? It's cumulative. Since the turn of the century, the early 1910s, we've had the booms and busts and so on and so forth. And if you track the progress of different categories of people, you will see that some recover faster than some others. And of course, that coincides with the fault lines of our society along the race, the gender, et cetera, et cetera. So what is important for us is to make sure that the structures that we have in place, mm-hmm. well, for instance, equal pay for equal work, non-discrimination, that all of those things are pursued and enforced. And so far, I think it's not a question for economists or the voters, because we know what we want, but it's a question of I think it's a question of making sure that the people who we talk to, who speak for us, that they really understand who we are and what we want and what we are about. And I think so far, there's been very little progress in that respect.
I saw you shaking. You wanted to say something.
Well, we need to talk to them, and that's on your point of democracy. I still want to stress that we are waking up more than ever before. I think, instead of telling people to wake up, it's applauding them for waking up and what they're already doing. But we need to talk to our legislators. It's beyond just voting. We always just say vote, and that's a prescription, but it's an everyday action of being an American citizen. And so, having our legislators and lawmakers get to know us. There's so many easy ways by just emailing, calling, and then showing up to vote for every election, not just even 2 years or every 4 years.
Well, Malcolm X said when he was addressing students in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they said, what is the one thing we need to do? And he said, you have to learn how to think for yourself. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say wake up and not just that people are already woke, yeah, there's motion on the ground, but I think we tend to underestimate the importance of us actually learning and studying and really understanding how the economy works. Because there's certain myths that we just carry around. One myth is that actually scarcity is what underlies, our situation in America. We actually are an extremely rich country. Household wealth went over $100 trillion last year, which means poverty is really just a construction because we decide not to share things. It's not because we don't have the capacity to have enough housing, to have it for everyone to have a good income. We actually do. But our politicians act like, oh, you know, there's shortages. We can't afford this. Martin Luther King said a long time ago, I refuse to believe that the vault of justice is bankrupt. You know, we're much wealthier now than we were then. And a second myth, we talk about the economy, we use it as a noun. Like the economy is something that's separate from other than a social relationship about how we decide to take care of one another. That's what the economy is. It's the economists say charts, mathematical, this and that. That stuff is mystifying. The economy really is how we decide to take care of one another. Proof positive. My great-grandmother, who I knew, was a slave. Slaves were sold on the market as commodities, like a cow or a plow. I happen to know my great-grandmother wasn't a cow or a plow. And if you're black and you talk to any of your ancestors, it's real clear to you that slavery was about a human social relationship. It wasn't about some abstract laws or how the economy works or how the market works. It was a human relationship. And the economy right now is about human relationships, how we decide to treat and care for one another. That's really what economics is. And so we gotta actually get with people and say, look, we gotta do some thinking together. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not to, I love the activism, but we also gotta start using this up here.
Completely agree.
Just by way of some numbers, New York's Independent Budget Office did some accounting, and for the last 8 years, low-income earners lost ground, while middle income to what they deemed not obscenely rich people stayed level, while the ultra-wealthy raked in the difference. So that's from right now in New York City, from a sample of 770,000 personal income tax returns that came. Poor people lost ground, middle people held on, and the people on the far end just got richer. Top that.
Well, something that's been keeping me up at night is the way in which climate change is going to be exacerbating inequality. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, and also to this most recent point that economies are actually based on relationships. I was wondering if you could speak to the ways in which we can, reconfigure the narrative of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and build a sort of empathy that we need in our communities.
Thank you.
I'll say something here. This is from John Rawls, the philosopher on the study of fairness. Remember, he's the one who developed the idea of the veil of ignorance, which basically says, imagine that you're not yet born and you don't know where in society you're going to be born, into what segment, to what parents, with what pocketbooks. Then, under that veil of ignorance, how would you organize society? What would you say is the best way? And I think, and I'd love to hear what the rest of you think, but I think if we got our, during a political debate, if we asked that of all the candidates, put them on the spot, let them say, if I didn't know where I was going to be, what kind of society would I prefer to be born in?
In this question of bootstrapping, some of us, most of us, were born without shoes. How are you gonna pull up your bootstraps?
Listen, I so appreciated your question. Thank you so much for that, because I feel like over the last couple of years, especially watching how the Obamas were treated, regardless of the amount of bootstrap dragging, that folks do. There's kind of a conversation that's going on amongst many people in this country that for a certain group of folks, especially if you've got melanin, like the bootstrap thing doesn't matter, and, given the educational IQ of who happens to be at 1600 Pennsylvania right now, for other folks, it's actually quite the opposite. So like the fact that we can, have these conversations, gives to another level of this education we keep talking about, because, to give an example, one of my favorite things about working on the Affordable Care Act and healthcare, back in 07, 08, like before we even got to a law, was that folks were having a large conversation about what our relationship is to our health, to healthcare, and to the healthcare industry. And like that in and of itself, if nothing else happens, yes, I know there are challenges and whatever, but like getting to the myths and the facts of what's actually going on with our social contract can help us get to that next level of so therefore, what do we want and how are we going to get there? So on the bootstrap thing, absolutely, it starts with the conversation of, even with the folks who are pulling hard as all the things that I don't know if I can say on TV right now. There still is power in race in all the situations to deal with. The other thing that like kind of struck me when you talked about climate change and how we need to, there's so much we could talk about that, because I think about climate change, and then I think about when I first heard about climate change, it felt like a white guy in Greenpeace in a boat in the middle of the ocean, versus environmental justice in the Bronx and kids with asthma next to the, and so I think, that we can, as we continue to talk about race and power and all of the things that really affect us in our hearts and minds, and where we can add solutions, because then that becomes, how are we changing, how are we working with the transit workers and the bus depots and the kids and the moms and the healthcare systems in the Bronx, and where are we placing jobs that like give us, that actually are leading to a future. I feel like climate change conversation is environmental justice and all of those different things.
I would say on climate change that in New York, some of the biggest problems we will have is actually heat and excessive heat, and particularly in Harlem and the Bronx. And right now we have no plan on how we're actually going to address that. And it's not some far off thing. And so it is going to affect us here, particularly low-income folks who don't have air conditioning or don't have access to a cooling center. Those are the folks who are going to be immediately affected, and we all know who those folks are. And the second thing I would say in relation to John Rawls, I think white folks have the privilege to imagine they don't have a body. But if you're a person of color, a woman, how do you imagine a world where you don't have a body? And who even thinks that way or has the privilege of thinking that way? I think we need to start from our actual bodies and what we actually think about one another and where our love and empathy actually is. And for my staff, I will tell you that when we got a call from the Cuyahoga Center by a worker there who called us saying, I'm calling you secretly because I don't want to lose my job, but we have hundreds of kids here who've been separated at the border, and they're in Harlem, and our staff went there and they saw 9-month-old babies with no one holding them, and toddlers with no dolls, no blankets, eating rotten food, sleeping on beds with bed bugs in them. That is what shifted. My whole staff changed because they said, who are we to torture children? And I actually think change comes from actual dealing with the physical, with the real, with the people. That's how I think change comes. And I appreciate what Rawls did as a mental exercise, but I actually don't think that's how we're going to make change. Through mental exercises. I think we got to reach out to one another. Black folks got to talk to poor white folks about what the issues are. That's how we'll begin to enlighten one another. And we got to say, we know you're in pain, whether you're black or you're white. Tell me about your pain. Why is it you're in pain and I'm in pain and we haven't been talking to each other? That's how I think we begin to get somewhere.
How do we begin to bust up this myth about meritocracy? We touched on it a little bit in the beginning on the strain of this bootstraps idea. I'm reminded of a study I just read about in Arizona where they took about 300 kids from a school that was urban, 91% students of color, free and reduced lunch as an indicator of not having a lot of money. And in the 6th grade, they got this group of kids and said, okay, do you believe that you can get ahead by doing hard work and being a good person? And the students who actually bought into that idea 2 years later were on a bad path. They had been in contact with the law. They had not marked any improvement in their schooling. They were really going down a road where the kids who looked that myth in the face and said, this is bull, this is not the world I live in, saw greater self-esteem and achievement. So those who said, okay, yeah, I can work hard and get ahead, when they were faced with the reality from being in 6th to 8th grade, saw their sort of vision of the world crumble, while those who saw it as nakedly not for me were on a trajectory towards success. So knowing what we know of that, how do we as this optimistic America get our children ready in our communities to face that reality?
Well, it's always better to be sober, you know, and understand what you're dealing with, usually. And knowing that that you're surrounded by myths is also very helpful and useful. There are some studies, actually, besides that show that the most effective predictor of your success in life is not your education, is not your experience, but your parents' income. And that's it, right? So if your parents' income isn't fantastic, then it's much better for you to know that you're dealing with some really harsh odds. Now, as far as bootstrapping, it doesn't exist. That is also something that you have to know, because we all rely on infrastructure, we all rely on networks, we all rely on the environment, the productive ecosystem around us. So if you, and social capital, if you go to school and if at your school where you have absolutely no choice who your classmates are going to be, if they're all going to end up being criminals, then basically that's who you socialize with, and that's what you have, and that's the outcome. If you go to school and all of your classmates are going to be Einsteins, then probably that is going to it's going to rub off in some way as well. But the problem is that getting into a good school where all your classmates are going to be Einsteins is very, very difficult, and you have to live in a nice house, and that house is a function of your parents' income. So we go back to your parents' income being the best predictor of your success. So knowing that and fully understanding what the reality is most helpful.
Bill Gates was in my freshman dorm in college, and at age 18 or 19, he got a big contract with IBM. And it wasn't because he had the best operating system ever invented. It was because somebody at IBM said, we're going to give this kid a chance. Now, this is in 1974, 73, 74. IBM wasn't giving opportunities like that to black folks, women. It just wasn't going to happen. To your point, there's bootstrapping is a myth. It's one of those myths that are out there. The second thing, meritocracy, that concept came from the IQ test. There are dumb people and smart people, hardworking people, lazy people. The IQ test came from eugenics. And eugenics was the beginning, the idea that women have smaller brains than men and black people have smaller brains than white people. And that's where that stuff started. And that's where those ideas came from. And one of the reasons I really like what Richard Carranza, our schools chancellor, said about specialized schools is we shouldn't be rationing quality education. All our kids are capable. We need to create opportunity for all of our kids. And it's not about saying some are dumb, some are smart, you're in, you're out. We should not do that to children.
Well, looking at that opportunity, I'm looking specifically at you two for the people who find themselves using all of that education that wasn't rationed out, going off to college, getting a degree, and in the case of being female, making about 86 cents on the dollar for every man does, being the one who made it out, and then having to take care of your family who never got to go to college or have their whole education fulfilled, and you find yourself with crippling debt on top of that. So in a lot of instances, a lot of women of color find themselves a little bit further behind than when they left, and now they're back at home in their mom's house or barely making it on their own, making good money.
So 86 for white women, 60s, right, for black women, Latina women, indigenous women, it keeps going, you know what I mean, down just to kind of do that, because not the all women kind of thing. And it's interesting because, yes, we do have a unique kind of fighting moment in terms of pay equity and valuing our work. And it's funny because to go just a little bit back to the conversation we were just having about how we need to think and come up with good ideas and organizing, like I'm triggered a little bit because, you know, I hear that sometimes as I want the folks who are struggling with economic inequality to come up with the solutions for free. Like, I feel like we want to have more town halls and work groups and conversations with your elected officials versus the, you know, participatory budgeting or the ways that, you know, to Deputy Mayor's, you know, the point about we are not scarce. There's money that's here that may get invested in a Bill Gates, but may not get invested in the brilliance that exists in our schools, in our projects, in our, you know, one of my good friends, Kamara Jones, down at Morehouse, says that we would have been to the moon and solved all these problems had we invested in all the black and brown and indigenous brilliance that existed. So I wanted to lift that point because I think if we, you know, kind of we're talking about how do we create space. And as we're still in Black History Month, right? We got like a couple days.
Got a few
We're still in Black History Month, you know, where you hear about all
Before
the inventors.
Women's History Month.
What's that?
Before Women's History
So I'm loving the intersection of Black history and Women's History
I'm here for it.
in terms of investing right there. Like, I love how the Movement for Black Lives policy platform included like a very clear section on invest and divest. So if you're talking about climate change, pull your money away from and invest it in kids. Like, so these other pots of money that belong to us because we have paid into it, because, you know, these budgets that our elected officials are sitting on where they have discretion to spend, you know, those are places where we can start to invest in and require that, you know, brilliant women, brilliant LGBTQIA, because that's a whole other set of inequity and, you know, that we haven't touched on yet, but making sure that like brilliance is valued and it is connected to this whole social contract we're trying to build.
So part of that social contract has to be wiping out the stigma of debt.
Absolutely, yeah. So income inequality is a women's issue. Student debt is a women's issue. Women hold 2/3. We hold $1 trillion of the $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. According to the American University of Women, African American women hold the most, and they're the most impacted. So this is student loan debt is a person of color issue. I think you're absolutely right. It's democracy, it's learning, it is more than organizing. I've been impressed with how during the Trump administration, people are learning, parliamentary process and the way civics actually works. So we're at the precipice of that, but we can't lose it because so many times we get so close and then we get bought off, and we just can't get bought off again.
Can't get bought off again. I'm looking at
bought off and killed sometimes too, right? Because just to be honest, because if we're talking about economies, like there was a great article in it. I feel like my mom, she's a research teacher and she always has to throw a citation. Shout out to Alessandra Lewis. But there was this great article in Atlantic Black Star that talked about like 7, African American communities that were thriving and then were attacked and died. So I push back on the word stigma a lot of times when it comes to mental health and economy, because for a bunch of communities that have had wealth, sometimes that comes sometimes with a target. And even so there's an article today, I think today in the New York Times, that talks about the history of policy and running numbers in the Black community and how that was a huge economic thing, in many communities. My granddad used to run numbers back in Southern Illinois, just to be clear, Alan Memphis Johnson. But there's a whole, there's a history of kind of folks, stopping and starting, you know what I mean, in terms of businesses or getting debt or education. A lot of what's going on with educational debt is a little bit of a pushback to a whole bunch of folks that weren't necessarily white men that were getting educated and putting forth different theories on how we should be moving. So I think it's yes to the organizing, yes to the putting forth solutions, but it's also an offense defense, because it is, it could be a little, upsetting, but there's a history of these things coming at you in a not so good way.
So before you go in, language me into a better understanding so we can stop with the stigma. What should I be saying instead of the stigma of debt?
Instead of the stigma of debt. I like the history of our economy, the history of economics of Black folk. Like something, because we're talking, let's go create it right here. That's the whole be heard thing, right, y'all? Because it's not, when I hear stigma, it feels like folks are uneducated and don't really understand what's wrong with them. I understand that when Navient calls me, they're probably calling my phone downstairs right now, to be honest, that it feels a certain way, that folks are trying to devalue my Georgetown education, all of the things that have been poured into me that makes me feel less than. And that just doesn't sit right. But if I think about this context and the history of how rates have gone up for loans and what's happening in different communities and what happened when the mob decided that my granddad's policy wasn't pouring into their banks, then I think a little bit differently about the history of where we are from economic equality. So for me, it's more thinking about economy and inequality in the context of our whole society. I know that's longer than stigma and not quite as cute as maybe you want, but it's somewhere it's a story, right?
So we are definitely going to get into this, but now that we're turning our language from stigma into understanding the history of these economies, I want to just steal a moment and introduce you guys to someone. You might recognize him as the bad guy from Orange is the New Black, or the good guy, get over here, the good guy from a new show that is called Paid Off, where he is changing the way that we think about student debt, because you've created a TV show that's a game show that the big prize is leaving debt free.
That's the hope, yeah. The big goal of the show is to push back against the shame associated with student debt, to increase empathy for people with student debt, to fight the bootstrap myth, to bring people out who are doing everything right, who followed the course that they were told from the first moment they went to school, go to college, get an education, and it's not panning out the way they were sold it was going to. So to fight some of those myths, to make them feel like they're not alone, so the 45 million people at home see people on TV that are like them, and understand if that person did everything right and they're struggling, maybe it makes more sense that I'm having a hard time with this too. And then we do it in an absurd way, because to mirror my family's experience. I was incredibly privileged. My parents took out loans and paid for my college education. It allowed me to go be a theater major, which is a bad decision if you're gonna owe money to anybody. So I learned about student debt when I met my wife, and she owed around 40 grand, and we could pay that off after I booked an underpants commercial, which felt like an absurd way to pay for an education. And if that's how we did it, I didn't know how the hell anybody else does it. So we created this purposefully comedic and absurd game show to say, how can these be the paths that people need to go to school, to pay for their educations?
Thanks for being here, Michael.
Of course.
And thank you for the idea. Everybody, it's Paid Off, Michael Torpy. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
So just in my conversations with Michael before tonight, I was just talking to him before about this idea of the show and people, and he brought this to light, really standing up and owning their debt for the first time. Like, how many of us, as much of that as we have ever said out loud, not maybe in your underpants, how much money you owe because of this education that you've been afforded, or any number of things, and can make a real accounting of the level of debt that you're in. And as smart as I like to think I am, I couldn't even tell you right now the exact figure of the debt that I am into for all of my schooling, but I know that they take the money every month.
But you should know your number.
I should, but I'm a dummy, and I don't know the number.
You're not a dummy. They don't make it so easy. But you should know your number. I mean, if most people have federal loans, that is the majority of the 1.5 trillion. We can all go to studentloans.gov and look it up and know your number. And paid every month. But we did a contest called Out with Student Debt. We encouraged people years ago to come out and say their number. And the more we tell people, and we took a nod from the LGBT community of coming out and talking about it. And in no way am I saying that's a comparison, but the idea is we have to talk about it. We have to talk about, economic history and then our personal economic health and where we're at. So then your neighbor, your brother, your postman, everyone has student loan debt, and then you're more inclined to work on it and solve the issue. So the more we talk to one another, the more we're going to have compassion to actually do something.
So yeah, what are the byproducts of that passion, compassion, and acknowledgement as we move forward in a way that can affect our democracy and our personal behaviors, whether it's who we choose to marry, how we choose to spend our money or invest our time?
Well, I want to point something out. I mean, these things are about control, right? The shame of debt is about controlling people with debt. The idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is about control. These myths are very endemic to ages of inequality, right? This was all stuff that was not student loans themselves, but this was all stuff that was very prevalent during the first Gilded Age, considering we're living in the second one, right? In fact, we sort of taught, when we learn history in school, we learned about the settlement houses. Those were actually established to teach the poor people how to behave properly so they could make it in American society. Charity was a huge idea in the first Gilded Age. There was a lot of shame about poverty and debt, and people who are poor must be dirty and alcoholic. All of this, by the way, ends at the Great Depression, when it becomes clear, because the catastrophe is so great, that it becomes clear, wait a second, this wasn't my fault. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Everybody, except for the very, very wealthy, are falling. Charity can't fix this for us. And that was kind of what ended that period. And it's no coincidence that it came back, starting in the mid-1970s and 1980s, as again, people became mostly poorer, stagnated, or a very tiny sliver became wealthier and more powerful, and they did once again what was told to people 100 years earlier, which is, we know better, we'll take care of you. And the debt builds up, and the shame builds up, and the lack of power builds up, and the anger in the system builds up.
Well, there's nothing like a plague to equalize things. Like historically, it has been shown that the greater the horrible event, the more equalizing, if destabilizing effect that it does have on a populace. So short of a big old catastrophe, there has to be something else that we can collectively do and be heard and move forward into a different understanding about our debt.
I'd like to offer a little footnote to that very interesting idea. And that is that if we as individuals and if our society defines our self-worth by our net worth, then it's completely logical that if you have a negative net worth, you are going to experience negative emotions, negative consequences. So it seems to me we have to look at the entire continuum. The challenge is going back to humans and human relationships. The challenge is not to assess ourselves and others by our net worth, but by other human qualities. And once we do that, we've escaped. We're out of the cage.
Can I add on to that?
That's good, but the bills still keep coming.
I love this point because my parents were civil rights activists. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and one of the things I remember from being a little child was every Sunday sermons like, God doesn't make ugly people, so there's nothing wrong with your skin, there's nothing wrong with your broad nose, there's nothing wrong with your wide lips, and stop lowering your head down when you see white people. And the transformation that I saw came out of that conversation. The demonstrations and the protest, all that came later. But the big transformation was when people stopped letting themselves their identity be defined by somebody else to keep them down. And I think that's exactly the point around the debt issue. And the second thing around women and black women in particular, the median net worth of an adult black woman in America is $7.
And my mother died a couple years ago. She was cared for by 2 black women. And I was shocked to learn they were making minimum wage. And they loved my mother. And there are hundreds of thousands of home care workers in New York City who take care of elderly people out of love. Absolutely. They do not get paid anything close to the amount of work and care they put into that work. And the only reason they are paid minimum wage is because they are women and because they are women of color. And talk about history, this nation was formed on women not getting paid anything.
That's right.
Care work was free. As a woman, you just had to do it and you couldn't vote. That's the history. And so part of getting out of debt is actually paying women. And that's the other side of the coin, I think. Yeah. We gotta fight for women, and I say home care workers, domestic workers, number one. We gotta make this a fight.
So we are closing in on our last 4 minutes. So I just wanted to, well, 2 minutes in fact. So thank you in the aisles, but I just want to give you guys that last 2 minutes to minute 30. I'll steal 30 for myself to sum up anything that you could say moving forward that is a call to action that can put the power of this room into mobilizing and maybe just flipping that internal switch so we can get on with the work of making a democracy work for us. So somebody turn a light on in here.
Oh, you're looking at me. Economic inequality is a very complicated issue. And of course, we're not going to solve it all in one evening. But it is a solvable problem, and we need to start thinking about this information as a public information. There is no shame. We have enough skills and knowledge and will to solve it. And I think if all of us participate and do the right thing, then it could be addressed.
Helene?
I think we need to push back at this idea of the bootstraps and people pulling themselves up. And we need to talk, how I concluded Pound Foolish was that we needed to talk about our money. And that means that when, we need to be honest about it and we need to own our debt and we need to own our successes, but we also need to question where it's coming from and how it's accumulating, right? So when we're told about a story of somebody, who established a wonderful business, perfect example of the Bill Gates story, right? He also went to a private school, was a very connected kid from the get-go. Where does this come from? How do we make it? How do people not make it? And to just push back at these stories over and over again. Why do domestic workers make so much less than, I don't know, people who, pick up who get our garbage, right? I mean, there's nothing more valuable than domestic work, and yet they are treated like among the least valuable. They were out of the Social Security system for a long time. They are still relentlessly underpaid. And why is this? And we need to ask this about everything.
Well, we are 30 seconds outside of our credits, so I'm going to wrap things up for our broadcast audience right now by thanking each and every one of you for sharing part of your evening with us. We really appreciate you being here and contributing and listening, and thank to each of our panelists for being here and sharing your knowledge and really helping us move forward and wade through some of this stuff. We might have just opened the door a little bit to change the stream on economic inequality, so give yourselves a round of applause. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for being here. Good night.